Here's a long form of episode 7. We're talking about P&IDs when you have an MOC change in place. Number one thing to remember in that is your documentation and how you're upkeeping these drawings. A lot of times we'll pull a drawing to make a new revision. We don't even realize that we didn't document it properly, that drawing's pulled. Somebody else pulls that drawing for another project. Maybe they're doing a PHA, maybe they're doing a P&ID assessment, a walk down, a field walk, and they don't realize that you have this out making changes. So the most important thing is when we pull this document out of our vault, out of our online database, our SharePoint, those sort of systems, denote that we're making changes. And a good way to do that too is, if you're doing a project and you have some red line reviews, go ahead and make those red lines and upload that document back into the database to let everybody know, hey, this is being edited. These are the changes we expect. You can even do that at different versions of the red line. That's not an issue, okay? The main thing is that you have something in place to make sure that you're capturing the right revisions and that you don't save over that revision with another project, okay? That gets a little bit tricky when you've got multiple projects going on that's using the same drawings, but your program should be able to handle that. If you need to proceduralize that, maybe that's the way to go, but you should be able to handle it to where you have different revisions without overlapping one another. One thing to point out too is if you do have multiple projects on the same P&ID, make sure that the changes on both of those are two separate revisions. So you can document the different dates that it got changed based on the different projects. So that's important with our documentation. Next is when we're making those changes and those red line changes and we're saving the new revisions over, sometimes we'll paste things from other projects. We'll take, let's say we're moving an exchanger. We'll take that whole section, we'll snip it, and we'll put it on there to help the draftsman. Maybe they didn't go back and just draw everything or draw red lines in place. They pulled some equipment or pulled some data from some other drawings. Make sure when you're doing that, you don't overlay that on top of existing equipment, on top of existing instrumentation, on top of boundaries. The person who's drafting is not going to know when you overlay it on something unless you point it out that they don't want this deleted. Okay? It's going to be very difficult for them to know what you want kept and what you want stayed in unless you denote it, if you're taking those steps. If you're just doing a red line where you're drawing all the changes in, then that's obviously pretty easy and pretty straightforward. But we have seen before where people overlay equipment, especially when that equipment is the same as something else you're putting in. Maybe you're putting in a spare pump, another train that's identical to the other ones. Make sure that the existing piping, the existing valves, those sort of things don't get overlaid and don't get taken out by accident. That's a key piece that you want in there. That's very important. Make sure if you move equipment or documentation from one drawing to another, you get the associated equipment information, the associated sizes. All that gets moved over as well. One thing that happens with that sometimes is we don't move those over, or if we demo something, we don't update that information, and we end up with information on a drawing where that equipment no longer exists, or two P&IDs that have the same equipment on it. That gets super confusing then when we go to change something again. We go to make another MOC. We have two drawings with the same reactor on it. We don't know which one to pull. We might edit one and not the other. So we want to make sure that we capture all that when we're doing changes in our documentation. That really comes into place with our databases and how we detail our red lines. Okay, those are going to be the most important things. In that similar vein, we'll have an example for you here as sort of our third point, and that's deadlines. I see this a lot where we take a piece of equipment out in demo and all we do is we take the equipment out and we leave the piping. So there we have 3 drawings worth of piping, and we get to the 4th drawing and there's nothing there. So it's just piping on the page because we demoed something and we didn't take the time to change the other drawings as well. What really can happen if you don't have anything there, you don't have any valves, it doesn't need to be on the same drawing as the other equipment, you can take that piping back, take it off of that drawing, you take that system off completely, and add those effects on the drawing before, the drawing after. We'll have a detailed example of how to do that, but I know a lot of times when we're doing these changes and we're making these edits, we think about how can we be less complicated? How can we make things simpler? And by making them simpler, we say, let's just edit one drawing instead of multiple drawings. But what we end up doing is we make following the drawings later more complicated. So when we're making these changes, we want to make sure that we're keeping these revisions and these changes all straight and correct in chronological order if possible from when the projects change. Make sure when a project gets done, you put that revision on the project that got done first, obviously. These are all just some tips to help us when we're doing MOCs make sure that our MOC drawings are correctly reflecting what we're changing and they get catted into our master set of drawings. Next, we'll have an example that kind of shows you some of these things that we're talking about in greater length. Here's a couple examples of what we're talking about when we do an MOC and having deadlines or having issues with depicting how we made changes. So in number one, let's say this is the exchanger that we have. We've got cooling water coming in, cooling water going out, got our process coming through the exchanger. We decide we're going to demo this line. So in number two, in the revisions in the MOC revisions of this drawing, we need to cloud that area. That red cloud is going to stay. It's going to signify that there was something here that we took out. Those green lines there are dictating that we are going to take something out. So you would draw the red with the green over on top of the exchanger on the demo drawings, and on the live drawings version of the MOC, it would have the cloud stay. Okay, so then in the new versions, when it comes back into the system, the next revision, you can remove the clouds from the drawing. Number three depicts what we're talking about. It looks like just two pieces of pipe, but let's indicate basically that cooling water supply and return. Now in the next revision, those pipes are still here with just caps and flanges. A good practice there is to carry this back to the original supply drawing and cap it there. Because what ends up happening is you look at the supply drawing and the return drawing. Now you have this intermediate drawing that really has nothing on it. And that can create confusion, especially if somebody fails to grab the wrong revision when they're doing a project. It really can get quite confusing that there's nothing that this supply and return is actually going to now. So those are just some tips to kind of help you when you're making MOC edits. So those are some of the things we see that people have questions about, and really is going to help out your team understanding P&IDs in the future. Hope you like the content. As always, you can check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or at our website.